What's up everybody, I'm back for another tech house, jacking house drum tutorial, and in this one we're gonna get dirty and go over some techniques and tips and tricks that you can use to dirty up your productions a little bit. So yeah, let's jump right in. So now we're looking at the project of the drums that you were just listening to. And just to go over this real quick, I have all these channels in here and I don't usually work like this. So I like to work in clip view, but I felt like for this video it makes sense so we can see every single element and I can show things in a little bit more detail. So let's jump in, but not actually start with the drums, but start with the noise, because sometimes I like to start with the noise samples instead of just the drums, because it kind of inspires me. You have some artifacts in there going on, and I usually like that to have like this noisy sub layer to kind of create a vibe. And oftentimes, I mean, I was using tape noise and vinyl noise and this kind of stuff, and I just got a bit tired of it. So now I'm kind of trying to create some noise sounds on my own. And just this example over here, we have this kick drum sample basically. We can give this a quick listen. And this kick drum sample has this crazy noise in the back. So I was like, okay, I'm going to grab that and loop it into something. And then to make it stereo, because it was just a mono sample, I actually created two channels. And I panned one to the left and one hard right and just started the sample at two different points. So that's a cool trick how you can create some stereo ambience noise sounds basically. So let's just listen to the noise real quick. There's obviously some movement in there, but that can be quite cool to create kind of a slow flow in your drums. And if you later compress your drums within a bus, you can also, it will also kind of move with your drums a little bit. So yeah, I just looped it and did some fades. And then of course, since this was a kick drum sample, I had to add some EQ and cut out the low end because there was some rumble which I didn't necessarily want. And then because there was a little bit of too much movement because of the loop, I added like I wanted to add some compression, but I ended up limiting it. So you can see the ratio over here. It's saying infinity, which is basically a limiter, just to remove some of that movement. You can see how the limiter is kind of evening things out a little bit. Cool. Let's jump into the kick. And my tip for kick drums is don't hesitate to just use good sample packs or sample drums from tracks that you like, because making a good dirty kick drum sample that actually sounds pretty cool, like these nice distorted old school drums, it's super tough. I've been trying to do it for quite a long time and I haven't managed, and I've been using decapitator and all different types of distortion units, but I haven't managed to pull off the exact sound that I like. So yeah, I sampled this kick drum, for example, and this is it without some processing. So it's pretty rough. It was a little bit too rough for my taste. So I actually added a little bit of dynamic EQ, just like around 500 Hertz. This is with the EQ. It gets a little bit beefier and takes out some of this boxiness, which I wanted to remove. Also, this way you can get a little bit more space depending on what kind of bass sound you want to use for the bass sounds around here. And yeah, and the reason I used a dynamic EQ in this case is I wanted to keep the punch in the beginning, because if you remove these frequencies and your kick is kind of going through that frequency range, then you're losing some of that punch. And I just wanted to remove the boxiness at the point in the tail where I don't need it anymore. So this is why I did it dynamic and not just a fixed EQ. Yeah. All right, but besides this, like a little bit of processing, these drums are actually pretty rough, because it's this video is more about creating the drum groove, I guess. All right, let's continue with our dirty drums and tips for that. So the next thing is, when you start selecting your drum samples, you kind of want to go for some dirty samples. And what I mean by dirty is technically, or basically, that it's not just like a clean 909 sample. There's some stuff going on in the sample. So let's listen for this head, for example. Maybe even without the noise. Can you hear how there's like stuff happening? And that's a cool basis. I usually start with getting some sounds like that, because if it's just like this normal hi-hat sound, there isn't that much character in there. So that's pretty cool. And another tip for these kind of drums is I oftentimes actually use hip-hop sample packs and then create house music with them instead of using the new conventional house sample packs, because they can kind of sometimes be a little bit too clean for my taste. So that's something I picked here as a hi-hat. And then my idea also, maybe for some background info, is usually I like to start creating kind of a darker vibe and then start adding some brighter stuff in there. And I know this hi-hat might sound a little bit bright at this point, but you will see what I mean in a minute. Okay, so now we have this, we have our kick in our hi-hat. Let's add a clap. And also here, you can find some cool distorted samples. So I kind of picked this sample over here. It's cool. It's kind of snappy and good. It has some nice tail in there. So this could be a cool clap to use here. And then once I have like this chunky lower clap sound, I usually use a little cleaner clap sound, which sounds more like your conventional, or which is just less distorted. So this would be the second clap alone, which sounds more like your classic clean 909. And there's like, it has this clap in the beginning, but this part, that's where, like, that's what I call some dirt, which I like. Okay. Okay, next simple step would obviously be to kind of get a 909 hat, which I then picked here. Also cool and snappy. Let's add it to our drums. So this already sounds pretty cool. Like, it's just these few drums, but because they have some character, they actually work out quite nicely. And we haven't even done anything to like make the samples change and modulate them a bit so they sound more natural. This is just what we have for now. And before I forget, I actually run a little Instagram channel called Olien's House, and I post some quick tips almost every day. And if you're spending some time on Instagram, why not also have a little music production content in there? I'm going to put the link in the description. I would really like to see you over there. And yeah, let's continue with these drums. I kind of picked a 909 hat, which isn't like crazily bright. So let's look at this. You can see that it stops like around 8K or something, which is not super high. So it kind of has this dip in the high end, which allows us then to use some samples and create some space over there. And also something, if you learn from some other clean house EDM producers to low cut everything, you don't want to low cut everything if you want to make some dirty house drums. If you need to low cut it because there is some hum in there which is messing with your bass line and your kick, you can definitely do that. But sometimes if it's like this quiet down here, you don't necessarily have to remove it. It can actually add like some rumble and stuff, which doesn't have to be too bad. Okay. All right. So, and obviously, if you're a slight beginner, maybe let me know in the comments or write me on Instagram, because in this case, I assume that you know how you can do like a basic house beat like this. If you don't, no problem. Hit me up. I will also make some videos on that if that's wanted. Okay, let's add another shaker layer. So now, since we kind of have this had this space that I talked about with this 909 hi-hat, we can add this extra layer on top. And as you can hear, if we play these two hi-hats together, doesn't necessarily sound great. Like, the timing is a little bit off. It doesn't sound super tight, but that's kind of the idea or a principle that you can use. It's not that important that everything is super tight if you want to get like a loose, dirty groove going. So That's another layer. Let's listen to that. Okay, now the kick is kind of by itself and we have a lot of high frequency elements. Why not use another drum, which doesn't sound like any of the others that we have at this point? Why not use a tambourine? Let's listen to that. There's a little click in the end. Let's leave it in there and keep things dirty. And you obviously don't hear the tambourine when the clap is playing, but on the kick you can hear this. Nice. And then just add one shaker or something like that. Also just repeating after this tambourine to create this rhythm together. Also by itself sounds a bit weird, but let's add it to our mix. Starting to jack a little bit. Nice. Okay, let's add some percussions. Also something down here. This was from a little loop and there was like this kick and a rim sound that I liked. Let's give a quick listen to that. This sounds good. And one of the reasons it sounds cool and dirty is I didn't over-engineer and remove all this low end in a crazy way. I just added a fade and added a little bit of EQ with a low cut. You know, if this is bothering you, you can just make this a little bit steeper. But I actually liked it more before. Okay, so now we're starting to add some jacking percussions. And here it's just playing like this jack rhythm. And then, yeah. And I felt like now it's nice. I needed just a little extra something in the clap, so I added the snare, which has like, it's a little bit snappy, so it's gonna cut through nicely. Subtle. Snare coming in. And for these drums, I didn't really do much. I just picked like from some hip hop samples, some snares. You can hear. I usually try to pick something that just sounds nice, go with the flow, go through some samples. But for dirty drums, it's always cool to have something happen besides your drums. Some cool room sound, something, yeah. Okay, then I was a bit like, okay, this tambourine in the beginning on the kick is kind of cool, but it sounds a bit weird if it's just being very audible on the kick. So I have another tambourine here, which is longer with some like decay on it and room. So it kind of gets audible even though the clap is playing. Let's listen to that. Cool. Rim sound. And again, we have the rim sound, but there's more in there. Just a little drum fill at the end with like a 909-ish kind of sound. Cool. Okay, this is already something that you can work with. Usually at this point you can already start like focusing on your music and your bass lines and melodies and then continue your drums, because sometimes I feel like if you're doing too many drums, they will dictate what you can do rhythmically in the melodic departments. And sometimes that's cool to work that way, but you can also consider not completely finishing the drums and starting with a kind of simple groove, then creating a bass sound and stuff, and then be like, oh nice, these drums would now fit nicely. Little extra tip, it's always cool to have some drums with different textures in here. So this, for example, to just have like a bell. None of the other drums sound like this and have these like strong resonant peaks. So it can be cool to add something like this at a point. So my last and final tip, we can ignore some of this, but my last and final tip is don't hesitate to use some loops. Because just like with sound design or anything really, there are some people doing excellent work and creating some groove loops and stuff like this and make them sound amazing, and it can be very tough and take years to replicate something like this. And just using it can actually help you to continue making some cool music, and maybe later on you can do everything by yourself, but for now sometimes it's okay to use loops. Like if every time I watch some tutorials from real pros, I ended up being like, oh shit, they use a whole lot of loops, even though there are some people out there who say don't do it, you can totally do it. So let's listen to this groove loop from Joko's sample pack. And do this one. This is just a jack-in loop basically. And you can just layer some of these loops quietly below the drums, and you will not hear them that much, but they will just like fill in all the spaces where you don't have a sound yet and just add some variation. Cool. Then you can add a right sound or something. Yeah. Let's end this video with this ride trick over here, and that's basically a polymeter, which means I just added this ride sample and let it play like 3/16 notes, and then just duplicate it 5 times, so it's playing this. And then since you want to kind of have it repeat over 1 bar, do it like that. Nice. That's it from my side, and see you soon. Peace.